Writing. The conference room went silent so suddenly that even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to disappear. Everyone had heard the CEO raise her voice before, but never like this. Her words struck the room with the force of a slammed door. Do as I said or quit. Across the polished table, a single father stood perfectly still, one hand resting on the back of a chair, the other holding a small paper bag containing the lunch he had packed for his 8-year-old daughter. Then, without arguing, without defending himself, without even looking angry, he slowly walked back to his desk and began packing his things. A few employees exchanged nervous glances. Someone whispered that he had finally lost his job. But when the CEO saw what he placed inside that cardboard box, the color slowly drained from her face. And when he finally walked toward the exit, she realized that the man she had just ordered to quit had been carrying something far more valuable than an employee badge. He had been carrying the last piece of faith this company had left. Before we go deeper into this emotional story, if you believe that kindness can give people second chances, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Little Kindness Tales. Your support helps us bring more stories about compassion, courage, and the unexpected ways one small act can change a life. The man at the center of that tense room was named Elian Mercer, a quiet 38-year-old father who had spent most of his adult life learning how to survive without making noise. He arrived at the offices of North Star Innovations every morning before sunrise, long before the elevators became crowded and the lobby filled with expensive shoes and hurried conversations. His job was not glamorous. He worked as an operations coordinator, the person who quietly solved problems that nobody noticed until they went wrong. If a shipment disappeared, Elian found it. If a client needed something at midnight, Elian answered the call. If two departments blamed each other for a mistake, Elian was usually the one who stayed late and fixed it. He never complained because there was always someone waiting for him at home, a little girl named Juniper who believed her father could fix anything in the world. Juniper had large curious eyes, a laugh that arrived without warning, and a habit of leaving tiny handwritten notes inside her father's lunch bag. Some said things like, "You are the best dad," while others were simple drawings of sons, houses, and the two of them holding hands. Elian kept every single one. His wife had died 4 years earlier after a long illness, leaving him to raise Juniper alone. There had been nights when he had sat beside his daughter's bed, exhausted beyond words, wondering how he would pay the next bill, how he would keep working when Juniper needed him, and how he could possibly be both a father and a mother to a child who still woke from bad dreams calling for her mother. But every morning, Elian got up. He made breakfast. He tied Juniper's shoes. He kissed her forehead. Then he went to work and did what millions of ordinary people do every day, he kept going. The CEO of North Star Innovations was a woman named Serafina Vale, a brilliant business leader who had transformed a struggling company into one of the fastest-growing technology firms in the city. She was respected, feared, and rarely questioned. Her decisions were quick, her expectations were high, and her patience was famously short. Employees often described her as someone who could see 10 moves ahead of everyone else. What they did not know was that Serafina had built her life around never needing anyone. Years earlier, when she was young, her father had abandoned the family after a financial crisis, leaving her mother to struggle alone. Serafina had promised herself that she would never be helpless, never depend on someone else, and never allow weakness to interfere with success. Over the years, that promise had become a wall, and the wall had become the person everyone saw. The trouble began on a bright Tuesday morning when North Star was preparing for its most important presentation of the year. A major international investor was visiting, and Serafina wanted every detail perfect. But a crucial set of financial projections contained errors, and the mistake threatened to delay the presentation. Serafina demanded an explanation. The room filled with nervous excuses, but Elian quietly examined the numbers and discovered that the problem had originated in a software update that had altered a reporting formula. He knew exactly how to correct it, but fixing the issue required delaying the meeting by several hours. Serafina refused. She wanted the presentation to proceed immediately. Elian tried to explain that presenting incorrect information could damage the company far more than postponing the meeting. His voice remained calm, but Serafina was already under enormous pressure. She saw his objection as resistance rather than responsibility. In front of senior executives and department heads, she told him that he was not there to question her decisions. Elian looked around the room and noticed the expressions on his co-workers' faces. They knew he was right, but no one spoke. He lowered his eyes, nodded, and returned to his desk. For the next 3 hours, Elian worked without stopping. He found the corrupted data, rebuilt the financial model, contacted the software team, and prepared a corrected presentation. By the time the investors arrived, everything was ready. The meeting went perfectly. The executives congratulated Serafina on the successful presentation, and the investors praised the company's professionalism. Not one person mentioned the man who had quietly saved the entire meeting. But Elian did not care about recognition. He was thinking about Juniper. That afternoon, his daughter had a school event. She had been chosen to read a short story in front of her class, and Elian had promised he would be there. He had promised twice, actually, because Juniper had looked at him with complete seriousness and asked him not to forget. As the clock approached 5, Elian gathered his things. He had already arranged for another employee to cover the final report. He was almost at the elevator when Serafina called him back into the conference room. The investor had requested one more document, and Serafina wanted it completed immediately. Elian explained that he could finish it first thing the next morning, but he needed to leave now. For the first time, Serafina noticed the small paper bag in his hand. She asked him where he was going. Elian simply said that his daughter was waiting for him. Serafina told him that the company was more important at that moment. Elian quietly replied that he understood, but his daughter had been waiting for him for a long time already. That sentence irritated Serafina more than it should have. Perhaps because it reminded her of something she had spent years trying to forget. She told him to stay. Elian hesitated. Then came the words that would change everything. Do as I said or quit. The room froze. Elian looked at Serafina for several seconds. There was no anger in his face. Only exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that comes when someone has been strong for too long. He nodded slowly, returned to his desk, and began packing his belongings. At first, everyone assumed he was bluffing. Then they saw him place his framed photograph of Juniper into the box. He packed a small wooden keychain his daughter had made for him at school. He packed the old coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Dad." Finally, he reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out a worn envelope. His co-worker, Maribel Sloan, watched him carefully. She had worked beside Elian for 3 years and had never seen him lose his patience. She knew about Juniper. She knew about the hospital bills that had once nearly overwhelmed him. She knew he had refused several promotions because they required constant travel. But she had never seen him look as defeated as he did that afternoon. Then something unexpected happened. The envelope slipped from Elian's hand and fell to the floor. Papers scattered across the carpet. Serafina, who had followed him from the conference room, bent down to pick them up. The first paper was a drawing. A little girl had drawn a man wearing a tie, standing beside a smaller girl beneath a yellow sun. Above them were the words, "My dad always comes back." Serafina stared at it. Another paper was a school notice. Juniper's name was written across the top. The event was scheduled for that afternoon. Then she saw a handwritten note. It was from Elian's wife, written years before her death. The words were simple, but Serafina could not look away. The note thanked Elian for being a good father and asked him to make sure Juniper always knew that she was loved. Serafina suddenly understood. Elian had not been leaving because he did not care about his job. He was leaving because he had spent years choosing between earning money and being present for the only person who mattered most to him. And today, he had finally chosen his daughter. Serafina looked at the clock. The school event had already begun. Elian picked up the papers and placed them back inside the envelope. He lifted the box and walked toward the elevator. Then, behind him, Serafina spoke. She did not shout this time. She simply said his name. Elian stopped. Serafina walked toward him slowly. The entire office was watching. For perhaps the first time in her career, the CEO looked uncertain. She asked him where the school was. Elian turned around, confused. Serafina repeated the question. He told her. She looked at the box in his hands, then at the clock, and said something nobody in the office expected to hear. Go. Elian stared at her. She told him to go to his daughter. She said the report could wait. Then she added that she was sorry. Not the kind of apology people offer because they are afraid of consequences. This one was different. It was quiet. It was uncomfortable. It came from somewhere deeper. Elian left. Serafina remained standing in the middle of the office. For several minutes, nobody moved. Then Maribel approached her and gently said that Elian had probably missed the event. Serafina looked at the clock again. She suddenly realized that she had spent her entire life believing that success meant never stopping for anyone. Yet in one afternoon, a man with fewer resources, fewer privileges, and far more responsibilities had shown her something she had forgotten. Being needed was not weakness. Being kind was not weakness. And sometimes the most important meeting in the world was not held in a boardroom. Serafina drove to the school herself. When she arrived, she saw Elian standing near the entrance, still holding the cardboard box. He had made it, but barely. Juniper was running toward him, smiling so brightly that even from across the hallway, Serafina could see the relief in her face. Elian dropped the box and opened his arms. Juniper ran straight into them. Elian explained that she was his boss. Juniper studied Serafina for a moment before asking whether she was the person who had allowed her father to come. Serafina swallowed hard. She said yes. Juniper smiled and thanked her. That tiny thank you broke through the wall Serafina had spent decades building. She realized that the world had not become kinder because someone gave a speech or wrote a policy. It became kinder because one person decided that another person's life mattered. The next morning, Elian returned to North Star. He expected to find his desk cleared. Instead, he found the cardboard box sitting beside his chair. On top was a new envelope. Inside was a letter from Serafina. She told him that his position was secure, his schedule would be adjusted, and the company would create a more humane policy for employees with family responsibilities. But the most important part of the letter was not about work. Serafina admitted that she had been wrong. She said she had spent years demanding that everyone around her become stronger because she was terrified of appearing weak herself. She told Elian that his decision to leave had forced her to see something she had refused to acknowledge: a successful company was not one that consumed its people. It was one that gave them reasons to stay. Elian read the letter twice. Then he walked into Serafina's office. They spoke for nearly an hour. Nobody outside that room knew exactly what was said, but something changed that day. Over the following months, North Star changed too. Employees were encouraged to attend important family events. Managers were trained to listen before judging. Flexible schedules became normal. And Serafina began doing something that shocked everyone more than any new policy. She started asking people how they were. Not because she needed something. Because she genuinely wanted to know. Months later, Elian was promoted, but he accepted only after making one request. He wanted his new role to include mentoring young employees who were struggling to balance work and family. Serafina agreed immediately. One afternoon, long after the conflict had become a distant memory, Elian found Serafina standing alone near the office window. She was holding something. It was Juniper's drawing. The one that said, "My dad always comes back." Elian smiled and asked why she still had it. Serafina looked down at the drawing and said that she kept it because it reminded her of the day she learned the difference between someone quitting and someone finally choosing what mattered. Elian told her that he had almost never returned. Serafina admitted that she knew. Then she said something that stayed with him forever. "Sometimes," she said, "the people we are most afraid of losing are the people we have already pushed away. And sometimes, if we are lucky, we get one chance to open the door before they disappear forever." Years later, Juniper graduated from college. She became a teacher. At her graduation ceremony, Elian sat in the front row, older now, his hair touched with silver. Beside him sat Serafina, who had become something entirely different from the woman who once shouted across a conference table. When Juniper walked across the stage, Elian stood first. He applauded until his hands hurt. Serafina applauded too. And when Juniper looked toward them, she smiled. Elian thought about the cardboard box he had carried out of North Star years earlier. At the time, he had believed it contained everything he was losing. His job. His security. His future. But he later understood that the box had carried something else. It had carried the courage to say that his life mattered. And because one person had finally stopped long enough to listen, that courage had changed an entire company. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who may need to hear this message, and subscribe to Little Kindness Tales. Sometimes we never know how much a small act of understanding can mean to someone who is quietly struggling. And before we reach the ending, I have one special request for you. Please comment the words, "Kindness changes everything," if you believe that people deserve second chances, that families matter, and that one moment of compassion can change the direction of an entire life. Because the greatest lesson Elian ever taught his daughter was not about success. It was about showing up. And the greatest lesson Serafina ever learned was that sometimes, the person you are about to lose is not asking for special treatment. They are simply asking to be seen as human. So if someone in your life is struggling today, be patient with them. If someone needs a second chance, consider giving it. And if you ever find yourself in a position of power, remember that every person sitting across from you has a story you may never know. They may be carrying a sick parent, a frightened child, a broken heart, or a dream they are desperately trying to protect. Be kind. Because one day, you may be the reason someone decides not to give up. And sometimes, the smallest kindness you offer today becomes the moment someone remembers for the rest of their life. If you'd like, I can also adapt this into a more cinematic YouTube narration style, with stronger suspense beats and a high retention opening designed for AI voiceover.